As I mentioned earlier, I'm not doing any research on Chinese characters. Basically, I'm a historian of science. Within the Chinese character circle, what we call the in 普通话汉字文化圈, in Japanese kanji bunkaken. And I remember decades and decades ago, Showa period, when I was a graduate student studying in Kyoto. And the atmosphere here is basically very strict training in reading Chinese characters within those the ancient texts, mostly Piqing, pre-1644 edition. I can borrow from the library now. Most of them preserved as the rare books, regarded as rare books here. And my talk could be, say, not my current project. My current project is a little bit shift to Islamic study. And because on this occasion, I returned to Kyoto University, so I have to just add something different or new topics within my my current talk. And I would try to skip as a common knowledge to all of you familiar about the scientific revolution, and particularly what we call the telescopic discovery by Galileo. Sorry. About the Dutch, it's not so convenient. The first news of invention of an instrument able to enlarge distant images dates from September 1608, when this glassmaker Hans Lippershey applied to the Dutch government for an exclusive patent. Here's the portrait. I'm going to try to skip because he's not the main people concerned. When Galileo taught at the University of Padua, he devoted himself to fabricating scientific instruments. He therefore had an opportunity to, I think he as an instrument maker, he designed quite a number of devices, say telescope and some of the what we call the calculating device, a computation device. And here's the picture that illustrates here to demonstrate observational practice before the Pope. And he published books on the geometrical compass. This is for military use. And between 1608 and 1609, Galileo received news of Dutch spyglass and may have had the opportunity to examine one of them. Immediately fascinated by the new device, he dedicated himself to improving its power of magnification. In late 1609 and early 1610, he managed to increase its magnifying power from the original 2 to 3 times to 30 times. Thanks to his perfecting work, the telescope lost its original Dutch connotation and became instrument of Galileo, and he called it Chanicha. And that Italian translation firstly appeared in an edition published in Macau, 1751. You can see that 千里剑, 千里札. And In March of 1610, Galileo announced his first extraordinary astronomical discoveries made with his telescope, the cluster of stars that made up the Milky Way, the terrestrial nature of the moon, and the presence of 4 new celestial bodies orbiting around Jupiter. These discoveries were greeted with amazement all over Europe, but the following month brought others equally important. The presence of spots on the surface of the Sun, the phase of Venus, and the strange aspect of Saturn. This discovery changed the traditional wheel of the cosmos and launched a revolutionary process that unified the physical laws governing celestial and terrestrial bodies. Here is the that I took the photo from Galileo the museum at Florence, Italy. I'm going to do it. And this is the lens preserved in Florence of the Galilean telescope. And he published that the celestial messenger, or translated into in English as starry messengers. And this is about the observation of the lunar surface. And this is the other different refractive telescope being made by his student, Christopher Sinai. The same method also introduced to China just 10 or 20 years later, the telescope. Okay, now we move to the Jesuit language policy and cultural accommodation. When Europeans began to span the global world by regular sailing routes, Dominican and Franciscan fly, as well as Jesuits' father, had already followed the path to preach Christianity firstly in Southeast Asia, and then in the Far East. The Society of Jesus recognized that to become a competent user of the local language was the most fundamental tool of communication in their ministry. Therefore, the constitution of the constitution of the society, completed in 1552, suggests that every Jesuit missionary should realize the duty of his in enduring to learn the vernacular language well as an essential preparation. In 1549, a letter sent from Cochin in India to Loyola, the general of the society, Francis Xavier, commanded his colleague Henry Henley, because of his mastery of written and spoken Tamil, he was able to work alone with great profit. And because of that, the other influential Jesuit, Vaticano, when he was at Goa in 1574, he implemented a policy, definite language policy. That is what we call the accommodation policy in language. And as predecessor of Jesuits visit China, Ruggieri in Chinese, Lou Mingjian, and he came to China 1.5 years before Martin Ritchie, Lima Dou. Lima Dou, when Lima Dou firstly came to China in 1582, he was actively followed Vaticano's strategy of cultural accommodation. Ritchie's method of cultural accommodation was not an inflexible policy, but an adaptation attitude developed on a trial and error basis. He observed that China was very intelligent and reasonable people and placed high priority on moral principle and ethical behavior, and filled with admiration for science and technology. Here's the portrait, the picture of Ritchie. In 1583, Martin Ritchie arrived in Guangdong, northern part of Guangdong, Shaoqing, where he built a church, and the residents competed with a library. In a recent acquired map, quite expensive, a 6-digit in US dollar. This is around 1585 to 1589, something like that, a map. And you can see the location of the church in northern part of China, Guangdong. It was very likely that between the year 1583 and 1588, when Ricci and Righelli jointly prepared a lexicographical work entitled Portuguese Chinese Dictionary, this is a manuscript preserved in Vatican, which contained many translations of Western scientific and technical terminology. This is the original picture. Some of the entries in the Portuguese Chinese Dictionary might be associated with the making of guns and rifles in the Portuguese arsenal in Goa in 1530 to 1580s. A number of technical terms of Portuguese matchlock gun can be identified in that specific dictionary. So I will try to skip the table. The one table mainly on the armament, the gunnery, the guns, and the other table is about the optical device, the glasses, and also almanacs, and also the striking wall, the wall clock. Okay. Galilean telescopic discovery. I mentioned this beforehand. I will try to skip it. But I have to mention that guy. In March 1610, Galileo published the making of telescope and telescopic observation in stereo messenger in Venice, and he earned great reputation in Europe from then on. His telescopic discovery were further verified and was praised by the open mind, progressively Aristotelian and celebrated Jesuit mathematician Christopher Columbus. He now, today, is the December 15 to 2011, right? It's the calendar, the Gregorian calendar, that he was in charge for the Gregorian calendar. He never visited China, but since his name in German, like a nail, ding, a nail. 日本語なんていうか、金弁にちょ。And his student, Ricci, translate his work, particularly on the commentary on Euclidean element. And his name, because of the nail, is not no good. So, and then delete the golden, the Dean. And so what we call Ding Xianzang, Ding Xianzang. And he's a former professor of professor of mathematics at Collegio Romano in Rome. He trained a number of Jesuits. Father later visited China, say Tang Wang, of course Li Ma Dou, Long Huamin, a lot of them. And he really appreciates Galileo discovery. And since he's the scientific icon of the Jesuit society, Christopher Columbus is have very great influence to at that time. But anyway, the making of telescope and Galilean telescopic discovery spread quickly from Galileo Romano through India to China among Jesuit missionaries. The first reference to the telescope and a Galilean telescopic discovery in China, in Chinese, was the Tianwen Le, with the help of Chinese scholar official Zhou Xining, etc., and it was published in 1615. And the main author of that book, Emmanuel Dice, Yang Ma Luo, had the last page of description of the telescope and its discovery, indicating that telescope was not yet brought to China, and the news reached him only shortly before publication. This is the Tianwen Le, the last sentence. 待此气，自中国自日而后贤言此妙用也。 And as a scientific practitioner and a good friend of Galileo, Johann Schreck later adopted the Latin name Terence. In Chinese, Deng Yuehan played a significant role in process of introducing Galilean scholarship in China. He was a renowned Jesuit missionary, physician, naturalist, and mathematician, versed in many languages and studied medicine and traveled widely in Europe until he enrolled at the University of Padua in 1603, where he became an acquaintance of Galileo. I will try to skip some of it. From 1616 to 1618, Chirac traveled all over Europe as the advisor to Nicholas Turgot, Jin Nige. Together, they were preparing the mission to China, collecting funds, books, and scientific instruments. Among them, a telescope donated by Cardinal Federico Borromeo of Milan on March 1616, which was the first telescope to reach China in 1618, at the time Chirac entering Macau. With the help of Chinese convert Li Zhubo, Johann Adam von Bell, Tang Ruan, published Yuan Jing Suo in 1626, which gave the first comprehensive account of the Galilean telescope and its construction, as well as Galilean astronomical discovery and related illustration. That is the main edition, and it is a Galilean telescope. That is the lunar appearance appear there. And several Chinese translation or optical terminology appear in the same book, like Jin Si, short-sighted, Yuan Si, and the lens and concave lens, convex lens, and so on, and also Xie Tou, just refraction, quite early. In 1629, Xu Guangqi became a senior vice minister in the Ministry of Rice. In his new position, Xu Guangqi reported on the competition for predicting the solar eclipse of 1629. Chinese and Muslim predictions were not as accurate as the Jesuit determination of the time and length of the eclipse. When calls for calendar reform continued and drew government support, Xu Guangqi then announced the need for immediate calendar reform. He set up an office just nearby the Catholic Church at Beijing, now Nantang, the Southern Church. The inauguration of formal astronomical reform system in 1629 by Xu Guangqi, Li Zizao, and his group of people, and also Jesuit missionary, led to the official compilation of an astronomical compendium, Chongdeng Li Su, and construction of accurate instruments. Xu Guangqi therefore proposed to construct 3 telescopes, and for the observation of 7 luminary and ellipses in the same year, and they were used to observe this solar eclipse on October 1st, 1631. In 1635, Jacob Luo Yagu presented his astronomical work entitled Wei Li Zi. In this chapter, in chapter 9 of this book, Luo Yagu cited the name Zha Li Lo, the Chinese translation name of Galileo, which was the first time appear in Chinese text. And it is the Chongzheng Li Su, preserved now in Beijing Imperial Palace. And this is how Adam von Bell changed the title of that book to the Xiyang Xinfa Li Su. And in the introductory chapter of Xiyang Xinfa Li Su, particularly on the Lifa Sichuan, Adam von Bell mentioned Zha Li Le just Galileo, the second translated name of Galileo, about his achievement. That is the Xiyang Xinfa Li Su. We have very good edition of that book preserved in Jinbong Ken in Kyodai. So now I would like to move to the other scientific, or particularly on the computational instrument, Galilean proportional sector or proportional compass. Before, devoted himself to the making of telescope for observational purpose. Galileo showed great interest in making new mathematical instrument for culinary art of ballistic trajectory or surveying. This is the work, and this is the original instrument. I'll try to skip the technical description. Okay. But I have to mention that. Galilean proportional compass carries 6 pairs of line scale on both front and back sides. And this also translates into Chinese. The name of Galilean proportional compass was firstly translated as 度数次, ruler of proportional measurement, in the section of 远视奇器图说录罪, which was compiled by Johann Schreck in collaboration with Wang Zheng. But the details of Galilean proportional compass was not translated until Jacobus' law, 比例归结, appeared. This is the Chinese translation of the pairs of lines appear on the compass, proportional compass. It's a Chinese the picture. Here I would like to just mention 2 Chinese intellectuals in the period of early 7th century to late 7th century. Chen Jingmo. He was a student of Wang Daozhou, a very famous scholar in Book of Changes, and also Fang Yizhi. He also, he himself studied Book of Changes and Western surveying. In his book, when he published his third book, 杜策, in 1640, in a section of Chuan Qi, he mentioned about the European surveying instrument and the calculating instrument. That is the compass. That is the proportional compass. The other, Fang Zhongtong, he is also another famous mathematician in Lei Ming and early Qing. His father, Fang Yizhi, I just earlier mentioned that, is a good friend with Adam Solomon Bell. And in Fang Zhongtong Su Du Yan, which was published in 1687, was basically a synthesis between traditional Chinese mathematics and Western mathematics. And he called and he used this device to calculate about the shadow, the change of shadow, and also this the picture. His significant discourse on quadrant or geometric square surveying and also the proportional compass was later edited by Mei Wending in an unpublished manuscript entitled 三家测量核定, with only the rare copy preserved in Tokyo. Okay. The last instrument that I will introduce to you, Galilean pendulum clock. Because of his mathematical approach to motion, Galileo was intrigued by the back and forth motion of a suspended weight in his early scientific career. In 1602, Galileo discovered the period of swing of a pendulum is dependent on its aperture, the arc of the swing, the isochronism of the pendulum. And this gave rise to his in-depth study of the pendulum, the first harmonic oscillator. It is widely known that Emperor Kangxi of Qing dynasty had also an extremely strong interest in the pursuit of Western learning. Emperor Kangxi made considerable effort in studying mathematical and calendrical sciences with Jesuit missionaries, like Ferdinand Wright-Blaise, Nan Huairen, and so on. And Emperor Kangxi discussed with the Jesuits during his personal tutoring section. He mentioned about a device, a time-checking instrument, 验时仪. That 验时仪, the time-checking instrument mentioned here is a pendulum. Emperor Kangxi had first heard about the pendulum more than 15 years earlier, when Wright-Blaise had written on ballistic for him. around late 1670 to early 1680. Ribet called the instrument in Latin and in Chinese 水线球仪. It literally means instrument with a spear on a perpendicular line in Chinese in his book, 心智宁台以上事. In fact, Ribet's 水线球仪 was very likely received the influence of Galilean study on pendulum and its application for astronomical computation, as well as horological. Horological means watch or clock relating apparatus such as pendulum clock. This is the, you see, the clock, and this is a pendulum here. A swing, go and fall. Okay, Galilean science in Korea and Japan. During the Ming-Qing transition period, Chinese translated Western astronomical books and Western instruments were brought to Korea or Japan by diplomatic envoys. Jesuit missionary could be a merchant of Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. They all travel among these East Asian countries. There's a very clear historical evidence that Chinese translated Western astronomical books and Western telescope was brought into Korea at the time 1631 by Chong Tu Wang. This is Chong Tu Wang. They attribute that to him. And there's another telescope preserved in Korean Museum. And it is the Tianwen-le, the Korean copy, not the Korean copy. Copy of Chongzheng Li Su and Chongzheng Li Su Li Yin. That Chongzheng Li Su Li Yin lost in China, but its copy and also the Japanese edition preserved in Tenli University were circulating among Japanese astronomical officials in that period, and they received great influence from this astronomical compendium. Astronomical officials of Tokugawa Shogunate, such as Yamaji Lushizumi and his son Yamaji Yukiyoshi, were widely regarded as experts on the study of Chongzheng Li Su by Japanese intellectuals. Yamaji Yukiyoshi even wrote the commentary on Galilean proportional compass entitled Hirashaku Kaigi. You can see here. And this is Chongzheng Li Su Li Yin, the telescope, the Japanese edition. And this is the that one in Tokyo, in Todai. And moreover, the term of 曲线球仪 was widely used among Japanese astronomers in Tokugawa, Japan, but it was slightly changed as 曲游球仪, Suyo Kyogi, in Kansei Rikisho. In 1789, a real Suyo Kyogi was constructed by Toda Tosaburo, a clockmaker in Kyoto, quite nearby our hotel. Under the direction of three Japanese Confucian astronomical mathematicians, Asada Goryu, Takahashi Yoshitoki, and Hazama Shigetoki, this clock used for astronomical observation is a balance clock controlled by a long pendulum and light bulb swinging at the side of the case, which has two crown with escapement and an anchor of the specific shape. This is the picture for that instrument made by Japanese astronomer and the other. Okay, concluding remarks. In the 7th century, Chinese scholar officials faced various challenges from the West. In order to strengthen the content of traditional Chinese science, Chinese scholar officials made use of traditional thought arising from the Yi Jing, Zhou Bi Suan Jing, and Zuo Duan to reinforce their theoretical or philosophical fundamentals. Since Western learning performed practical value, researches on Western learning became a prevailing subject of the practical learning among Chinese scholar officials. Apart from the aforementioned Chinese convert Ming intellectuals and lawyers such as Fang Yizhi and his son Fang Zhongtong, and Fang Yizhi's friend Chen Zhimo had shown great interest on Galilean science, notably telescope and astronomical discovery, as well as proportional compass, and conduct research on Jacobus Ross's book, translated book. Likewise, German Confucian astronomical mathematicians discuss the relation between the traditional Confucian six signs arising from Zhou Li and the significance of learning mathematics. And so I have to just end here. Thank you for your attention.